it's a pretty loaded topic, I guess. Anyway, what are we talking about today?
Are we talking about? Let's see. Well, we can talk about Kerosene 454. Came
Oh
by
yeah.
to kill me.
Yep.
Whole thing is on streaming.
Yep.
An initial little recollection that I am realizing, and I'm not sure how this works, but I clearly, I don't know if I was like listening to this record. I had it on vinyl and on a tape. I don't know if I was listening to it through to the very end a lot, or if just certain things I just forgot about because it's been, I don't know, like 18, 17 years or something since I listened to it really heavily, even though I've
Oh
always
really?
kept it in my possession and like came back to it from time to time.
Yeah.
Because uh like the song that's just guitars and no drums and bass, I completely forgot that existed. I mean, I didn't forget that it existed.
Which track is that?
It's called, I think I wrote it down. What the hell is it called? Is it four something? Four knots?
Oh right,
It's
yeah.
like way towards the end. And and I thought it was gonna do something like lead into like a bigger like full on rock song, and it didn't. And so it's like I can't even say I forgot that it existed. It's almost like I didn't know it existed. Wait a second. I wonder, is it possible it's not on the LP?
I'm listening. I'm just checking it out now. I'm super. You know what's interesting is I've been listening to Kerosene 454 like pretty heavily through the years, like including.
Dude, it's not on the LP. That's why I've never heard it.
Oh, really?
It must have been on the CD only. How funny is that?
Yeah, the Kerosene 454 stuff was like in heavy rotation for me, like within the last like 15 years. For some reason, when I was like an avid runner, I really liked running to Kerosene 454.
Oh, I could see that.
Because it's just really like frenetic, and so I can talk about this record all day long. I guess it's just I forget what song titles are and stuff like that, but yeah.
I forget too.
I don't know that I ever owned it on vinyl or CD, and I don't own it. So I'm
That's
wondering
so funny.
what my copy was.
A tape of it or something, or a CDR
no,
or something.
I must have had it. I must have had, because I remember seeing them on the tour for this at the Middle East. Maybe you went to that too, but like I remember being very into this record, and I don't know what format I owned it on.
Let me say this about this record. So we've talked about Kerosene 454 a couple of times, and I never had any of their 7 inches, but I had that first LP, Situation at Hand, and I'd seen them once or twice, but it didn't really do anything for me. And then Situation at Hand was one of these weird records where whenever I listened to it, I would go, oh yeah, this record is awesome. And then as soon as it was over, I would forget about it. Like just routinely.
Oh, really?
And then like a month later, I'd listen to it again and be like, oh yeah, this record is awesome. And then forget about it. But when did this record originally come out?
You know what's interesting? This is 97, I think. Okay. I think the first time I ever listened to Situation at Hand, I was stoned. And
so
this was like...
You just broke edge?
I was hanging out with Brad from Temperance, and I think I had bought this like the day before, and I was staying at his place. I remember I was like sleeping over someone's house, and we put it on, and this is like my era of being straight edge, but for some reason on that day, just once, I just decided to get high and listen to it. It's kind of funny. That was like my first spin of that record.
Oh, 96 is when this record came out. So it's probably when 96. I saw them. Which makes sense. I wonder if we saw them with Blue Tip. When you saw them, did they play with Blue Tip at the Middle East?
I feel like they must have. But I think
they were opening for Blue Tip. And I was stoked on seeing Blue Tip. I didn't really have a feeling about Kerosene 454. And then when we saw them, I was just floored. That the whole set, and then they probably ended with that song Injection, the like single riff loop type song.
Yeah.
And I was just like, holy shit, this is what Kerosene 454 sound like. And I had really no idea. I didn't even know there was a new record at that, like while they were playing. So I was just like, man, I misjudged this band. Like this is amazing. And then they had the record for sale, and I bought it, and then basically like fell in love with them.
You're right. Yeah.
But this stuff in particular, like live, is incredible.
Oh yeah, that especially that song "Injection" live is like one of the highlights of their set. I just realized we didn't really quite do an intro to Kerosene 454, although maybe we don't need one because we did the other episode on the 7-inch. It was probably
So
an intro.
hopefully we'll edit it and get that one out before this one sees the light of day, and then there's
Yeah.
no need to introduce it. But we can introduce it like real quickly.
So what did this come out?
Post-hardcore band that started in LA, existed in DC, toured with Hoover, Blue Tip a lot, produced by Jay Robbins from Jawbox, and
ex-members of what was the hardcore band?
ex-members of Wind of Change, the band that produced Hoover, Kerosene 454, Samuel, and probably some other shit.
Wow. Yeah, kind of a youth crew, kind of straight edge band, right? So interesting that
they were supposed to play Youth of Today's last show in Los Angeles.
Wow.
But Wind of Change canceled, but they were invited by Youth of Today to play.
That's one of the things about Kerosene 454 that I like so much is like the transformation. Like everything was transforming at that time anyway, obviously, like people were evolving like their tastes and stuff, but the fact that one band like Wind of Change could produce all these other bands that were like definitely like sort of the leading edge of post-hardcore, you know, for the 90s is super interesting and impressive. I'm not sure I've ever heard Wind of Change, but I can imagine what they sound like.
I have. It's like, the first time I heard it was a long time ago. Like Al Barkley was listening to them one day, and he was like, "Oh, this is like Alex from Hoover and Regulator Watts' band." Right. But it's like it wasn't doing anything for me. I think I tried again on YouTube, but then I was just like, I'm just going to listen to Kerosene 454. One of those reactions. And Kerosene 454 existed from 93 to 98.
98 they broke up?
Yep.
Oh, damn. Yeah. And did we even name the record we're talking about? Came By to Kill Me?
I think so. I think I said it. I said Came By to Kill Me is on streaming. I hope I said it.
I think you did. Yeah, okay. Yeah, I mean, I've said it before, but out of all of their stuff, Situation at Hand is probably my favorite. Though that doesn't mean that I think like the other stuff is like not good, because it's all really good. But for some reason, I just have such an attachment to that record. But this one, Came By to Kill Me, is definitely like something I've listened to like hundreds of times over the years.
I think one thing that we said maybe that we were going to do with this record was see if we could drill down into like some specific moments that like help explain like why we like this record so much. So I definitely jotted down some notes, like, because you know, sometimes it's like real easy to end up talking our way around the record. So I don't know, like, do you have any like favorite moments or chunks or like just things where you're like, this to me is what this band was like so good at?
Well, for them, one of the most impressive things is Darren Zentek's drumming is just fucking amazing. Like, it's so next level. Like, I know Brendan Canty was like a good drummer, and there are definitely like a lot of good like drummers in that scene, but he's just playing on a level that seems so much more studied or something. It's like jazz, like really.
Yeah, he's funky.
Yeah,
I think that's like the huge difference. Like now I feel like I have a vocabulary to describe it, but you know, it's like you'll hear it like there are a lot of other drummers that would have ruined this music on some level. Like they would have played it more like straight ahead rock and roll. And like, now granted, like, so just for the sake of argument, if Brendan Canty was the drummer of this band, they'd all have to change how they play to make it work. I honestly think. I don't think it works. I think that Darren Zentek's drumming is like, it like tones down the aggressiveness, but in a good way, because it's like, it's such a noisy record, but then it's danceable. And I mean, that was one of the things I remembered about seeing them too, especially when I started to then purposefully seek out every chance to see them, was that like, that was that point, you know, 97, 98, there were all these bands that were kind of pushing this idea that they were like Sleater Kinney's gimmick was that they were like an old fashioned rock and roll band. But like Janet Weiss, is like a very straightforward, boring drummer in that context. Like, she's much better on Quasi than she was in Sleater Kinney, right? Because like she's not funky, right? It's like kind of boring. And I remember even seeing like Kerosene 454 with Blue Tip, and depending on who was drumming for Blue Tip, because they always had different drummers, you could like dance during Kerosene 454, and Blue Tip
Yeah.
is much more just like you nod your head. Just the nature of those drums, and like Darren Zentak, he's just a funky drummer. It's
He is.
awesome.
Yeah. Also, they have one thing I love about Kerosene 454, and it's evident on this record quite a bit more than Situation at Hand, but there's like a pop sensibility, like there's a hookiness to some of their stuff, and like some of the refrains and some of the songs just have like such nice sort of melodic, like vocal ideas.
There's so
and stuff.
Yes, that's one of the things that's shocking
He's a good
about
singer
it too, right? Is that like the perfect example is the way that this record launches. Like that's one of my favorite moments right off the bat. You can hear Darren yelling a count in. And then when Eric Deno comes in singing, he's got the weirdest yelling voice. You know what I mean? And so it's got like it sounds like his like throat is tearing apart, not like screamo, but it's just like it's chopped or something. It's very strange.
I always thought he had kind of a tough sounding voice. It almost sounds like it came out of hardcore, which I really like.
It's like
they could have been
reminds
so big.
me of Integrity when he's yelling.
Yeah. It's actually a similar tone.
Yeah. And then it's shocking because then when he sings, it's like pretty. But it's cool sounding.
He's got a good voice, and there's just a lot of, especially on this record, there's a lot of unexpected sort of hooks and things in it that I'm like, sometimes when I would listen to it while I was running, I would just like space out and imagine an alternate sort of universe where they got really big, because to me, it's like, I don't think they sound like the Foo Fighters or anything, but on some level, like just big guitars and stuff, like in that alternate universe, bands like Chavez got really big and stuff like that, like just this, I don't know. It's like, I would definitely say Kerosene 454 are like one of the most interesting bands to come out of like, not only just like post-hardcore, but just like the DC scene because of that stuff. I think like it's got like the hooks. I mean, a lot of those bands have, like Fugazi's full of hooks, I guess, but I don't know. A lot of it does.
You know what and again, this is probably one of those things where I'm talking around the band and not like about specifics, but I actually listened to some Fugazi today, in part because I thought the instrumental song on here, Angelic in G sharp, I was like, I swear to God, this sounds just like a Fugazi instrumental.
Yeah.
And I thought it was the one on the Kill Taker, but it's
Sweet
not.
And Lowdown.
Yeah, but it doesn't sound like that. Then I thought, well, maybe it's the one on Red Medicine, but it doesn't sound like that. But it kind of really, it's very strange because the dismissive thing to say about this whole genre of bands is that they sound like Fugazi.
Yeah,
but
people
one of the things I love about this record is there's some really different songs. You know what I mean? Like the opener, like Tracer, or there's another little kind of rager on here. I think it's All Eyes West. Or no, Fair Fire. Fair Fire is almost like another little like kind of hardcore song almost. You have like these like quick ragers. Then you've got something like Continued with the harmonics happening, and then you've got Injection, which doesn't sound like anything on the record.
Yeah.
But it all sounds so holistic, and it all sounds like it belongs together. And I kind of think of a lot of Fugazi in the grand scheme of things as being more like the Beatles, where it just feels like a bunch of random songs.
Yeah, they kind of are.
It's not like a criticism, but I think there's like the audio language of this band was very tight, and I think they could do very different things, and it still felt like it belonged on the same record.
Right. Yeah, I would definitely say these records are really cohesive sounding. But I think each release with them was a little bit, like this does kind of sound like Situation at Hand, but it sounds like an evolved version of it or something like that. And At Zero is like an indie record to me or something. It kind of sounded more like.
I feel like At Zero almost sounds like they made a record based on Injection.
Kinda, yeah. It's been a long time since I've listened to that.
I think there's an interesting thing about this record too. There's an interview with Eric Dano and Darren Zentak on that Conan Neutrons podcast. They talked about that this record was where they started writing with Darren.
Oh
And I
yeah.
think that that's probably, except for no, maybe even Some Walk might have been something that, no, I think Some Walk was written in LA.
Oh okay.
I think maybe a lot of Situation at Hand, actually it must have been. I think a lot of Situation at Hand was written before they moved to DC and Darren joined the band, because they were talked about that, which was like the first songs they'd written with him, which would
Right.
make sense then, that it kind of catches like that shift of like, it sort of sounds like Situation at Hand, but it's getting somewhere different because his influence is probably more pronounced. Its Closing has one of my favorite riffs of all time. I'm just gonna like, I just need to remind
Play it
myself
for
what
a
it
sec.
sounds like.
Yeah, do it.
Hold on.
Which song?
Closing, the third song.
All right.
Not this part, but this part's awesome.
Yeah. Yeah, they have such cool guitar parts.
And then when he sings over it, it's awesome. That
Yeah.
there's a bunch of riffs on this record that I cannot listen to this record for years. Like that riff is in my head all the time.
Yeah. Definitely.
It's weird how that happens. And I think one of the Worthington might have another one of those ones that like I think about it constantly for no reason, or I wake up in the morning and that riff is playing in my head.
I gotta remind myself which riff that is. Oh
Worthington.
yeah.
Let's see, which one is that? Oh, the drum thing is so
Drum
good.
thing. It's got that muted
Oh, I remember which one this is.
palm muted thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, so that's the thing. I feel like
The
we could
recording
have
is really
just
good.
done a stream of listening to this record and just being like pausing it and being like, that moment
We
is
could
so
definitely do a
good.
reaction video to this.
Yeah. There's, you know what's funny is we talk maybe too much about Lungfish. Somehow we're constantly have veered off into talking about Lungfish because we adore Lungfish, right? And we love the figuring out which riff can be played for 4 minutes, you know?
I was
And
just working on a piece before we got on the call where I'm trying to decide just that. Like, it's a very repetitive song that has like one change in it, and I'm like, does this work? I don't know.
and it's funny because then the genius of this, so the songwriting craft on this is so amazing, and the bridges are incredible, like
Yeah.
all over the place. It's like the riff ends, it goes to a new part, but it's not a new part. It is a bridge between two major whatever sections. Both guitarists will start out playing one riff, then one of them will switch to another riff, then the original one will also switch to a third riff, and then it will kick into a new section. And it's like the amount of detail that's contained in there, and that it doesn't sound hyperactive, spazzy, jarring. You know what I mean? It's more just
Yeah.
like when you listen to it, it's just packed with detail,
Well, that's where.
and it makes me want to play guitar. You know what I
Right.
mean? Like it's such like, yeah, and I think you said this about them. Like this is like important guitar music of the 1990s.
I definitely agree. And what I appreciate about it is a lot of it's all DIY. What I mean by that is like it's sounds to me like people, maybe aside from Darren Zentek, but like the guitars sound like very self-taught, kind of just like Fugazi does. Like,
Mhm.
have you ever thought about that? Like how remarkable in a weird way it is that Ian MacKaye like went from just being like a singer for a hardcore band that all of a sudden he's like playing guitar in Fugazi and like doing interesting shit. Like it's kind of like
What was the other? Did he play guitar in Embrace
no,
or
he
Egg
just
Hunt
sang.
or any of those bands?
I don't think so. I think
I don't
he
really
just
follow him enough to fully know.
yeah, it's impressive. I mean, but it's encouraging too because it like this kind of guitar work I think was important for me as a player because it helped me to understand that I could do it too. You know, like it's just
Yes. I'm sorry. I just
no.
thought of
Go ahead.
something, but I think I sometimes assume that he played guitar on records before that because have you ever heard that thing about those good, wait, was the song called You'd Make a Good Cop off In on the
Yeah.
Kill Taker.
Great Cop or something like that.
How he has tapes of that riff going back to Minor Threat.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so like he first tried to use it in Minor Threat and it didn't really work out. Then he tried to use it in Embrace and it didn't work. So he's been like sitting on and maybe it's in the In on the Kill Taker book, or the guy who wrote In on the Kill Taker book. He talked about that Ian pulled out all these tapes and played him every single time he thought we should use this riff. So it is interesting that he actually had been playing guitar in the background going back to at least Minor Threat, if not Teen Idols, which is neat. But it is a reinvention of yourself to be like, I'm going to start playing guitar and I'm going to find this dude who was like a self-taught, like I'm the most famous guy on our label, but I'm going to start a band with this self-taught bass player who hasn't played in a band. I don't think. That's wild too.
Yeah, Joe Lally, I don't think was doing anything before Fugazi.
And I could be wrong about this, but I was kind of under the impression that he picked up the bass so him and Ian could do music.
Possible, yeah. I mean, that type of stuff though, like Fugazi, Kerosene 454, and the fact that it's so high quality, like it's working within your means. Like maybe Ian MacKaye only really knows bar chords or power chords, but he's making them work. And same with all these bands actually, because none of the guitar stuff is complicated. It's tight, but it's not like super complicated. And I think that's one of the things I love about sort of DC hardcore, like in general, or like post-hardcore, the stuff that came out of DC after hardcore, is that it's full of this stuff. Like Hoover's like that too. Like none of it is virtuos. It's not like a
virtuosic.
Yeah,
virtuosic.
Virtuosic. It's
I
all.
I don't even know if I said it right at that point.
It's not virtuous. Is that the right word? Anyway, it's punk. It's like it's truly punk rock. And like, you know, I feel like what's also interesting, just from like maybe a nerdy gear perspective, but you know, DC hardcore bands are sort of known for post-hardcore, like the DC bands, Hoover, Fugazi, Kerosene 454, like all of those bands kind of had like a universal setup of a Marshall half stack and either a Les Paul in some instances, like maybe like Swizz, or like a Gibson SG. But that's like the sound. It's like usually an SG with like a Marshall like half stack. I don't know what specifically which model was favored, but it creates like a I think that's kind of like the sound of DC was that guitar wise. It's like that specifically an SG or a Les Paul, something with humbuckers and like a half stack Marshall. And then we were talking about like with Hoover how Alex uses 2 amps, like he splits them, and that could be part of it too. That's kind of getting into the weeds of technical stuff, but yeah, I would say the sound of DC Discord is Marshall amps.
Well, it's interesting
Gibson
too,
guitars.
I think I don't, maybe it's not End on End. There's man, I can't remember what this podcast is called, but the interviews are almost always with guitarists. It's one of those dudes that was like maybe in like the Hope Conspiracy.
Okay.
One of those Boston like hardcore bands from the like late 90s, early thousands. Niraj, I think his name is. And some other dude, these two guys, they interview usually guitarists. And I remember there's one with Stephen Miller who was in Unbroken. He was talking about his setup, and he was like, well, it's just a DC setup. That's like how he described it. He was like, it's an SG with a Marshall half stack.
Yeah, so you know about it. Yeah.
Yeah, I've heard that before. And I think maybe on End people talk about that too, right? Like people who aren't from DC, they talk about like yeah, you get, this is what you get. Like,
right.
It's like the
sound.
The deal.
Yeah, it's such a great guitar sound too. Like I have, my setup is, I don't have a Marshall half stack. I have a little Marshall amp back there though that is a modeling amp. So it's a really good modeling amp that digitally recreates the sound of different amps. Mm-hmm. And I'll set that thing on a Marshall Plexi, which I think is probably what Ian MacKaye uses. Well, those guys uses, but there's something about that Marshall sound that's just so awesome with humbuckers. Like humbuckers, for anyone that doesn't know, are pickups in a guitar that are I believe have 2 coils in them so they don't hum. Like, you know, single coils tend to have like a a kind of nastier sound to them. Not quite as thick, not as good for heavy music. That's
You
my
know what? A couple things related to that I think are interesting as I was like, because I've listened to this record a lot in the last week now since it's been on streaming. I've probably listened to it 4 or 5 times in full. And some of the things that stand out to me is like, one, they talked about this on that Conan Neutron podcast, that they really didn't want there to be, at least on the first 2 records, like studio tricks. Like as far as they wanted to go was what they did with the drums on the beginning of Worthington, which was like, I guess, using PZM mics. But in general, like they didn't want to do tricks. And they actually talked about that Jay Robbins really didn't want to do tricks either, that their demo recordings at his house are way crazier than the actual studio recordings. Like at the demo recordings, he would do stuff with echo and stuff, and the studio recordings are very dry. Yeah. What's cool about it is I feel like you can really tell what the band sounds like. Even if there are overdubs, it doesn't sound like there are overdubs, because almost all of the time you can hear 2 guitars. You almost never hear like a stray sound that would lead you to believe they're adding something in to like beef it up. It's like it sounds like a very honest recording, which for me at least gives me like a lot of appreciation into how much effort had to go to come into the writing process to find those points where, like in this instance, we're both guitarists are going to do the same thing, and then in this instance, we're both going to do different things and create this like wall of noise, which I just feel like the amount of like playing and reflecting that you have to do to find the right thing to do so that it works. Because it's an interesting record, because it's like it's noisy and melodic, but it's not jarring. I don't know. You know what I mean?
No, that's why I feel like they could have been kind of really successful in a weird way, like with the poppy kind of like hooks to a lot of the stuff, and just the quality of it. I mean, that's such a lame thing to say, like could have been huge, but then at the same time, when you really listen to things in retrospect, you can hear where, like, I mean, I think they could have been as big as Fugazi at least, and they weren't. They were, I would say Kerosene 454 were maybe not even slightly, maybe like completely underappreciated in their time. Like people that knew, but
I think they were totally underappreciated.
I think they were
like
too.
your favorite band's favorite band sort of situation.
Exactly. Definitely.
Well, even just the fact that Jay Robbins was like completely happy to produce their second record, was demoing with them, giving Eric tons of tips on how to like work on his vocals, like kind of like he was really producing them, and that he would encourage, like he'd hear a thing that was an instrumental and he'd be like, nah, you need to sing on this one. And that he was like really like pushing them, and the fact that they were touring with Blue Tip all the time. And I think Blue Tip were maybe a bit more accessible, and they did weird shit like tour with Tool and whatnot.
Did they?
Yeah. Not for like for a week or so or something like that. Weird. I saw them play a basement show at Al Barkley's. That was the last day of the Tool tour.
Oh,
so
really?
They toured with Tool they played at like stadiums for 2 weeks, and then the like last show was in Al Barkley's basement, which was
Don't rad. They have a song called Nickelback, which is really funny?
They do, and I think it predates the band Nickelback. It does, right?
Yeah, definitely.
Which is crazy.
Yeah.
Here's how I want to okay. Injection. Your favorite Kerosene 454 song, or just my favorite Kerosene 454 song?
Oh, it's not my favorite. It's up there, but I get a little with songs like that rely so much on one singular riff. I think it can either work or not work, and in this instance, it totally works. It's just I just think I have so much more love for Situation at Hand. So like anything that's my favorite probably is coming off of that record.
Right. I mean, and it's going to be like, and it's like the more fuzzy, noisy stuff probably.
Kind of like, do you know that song on Situation at Hand that starts with a drum click thing that goes really long? It's like,
I don't remember. I tried to listen to that record today, but it wasn't on YouTube.
Fucking amazing. I mean, we could have a debate. I would argue, we're not going to, but I would argue it's the better record of the two. But it has a song that starts off with like, it's like the drums go tick 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 tick, and you're like, what's going on here? And then all of a sudden the guitars come in like all at once, and it's just like, just it's stuff like that, that that kind of level of invention, and just
Hmm.
for something that's like supposed to be referencing hardcore, because in a
Yeah,
lot of
yeah.
ways these bands do sound like hardcore bands at the core, like especially with like the pummeling drums and
It's funny. I was thinking about it today, how weird it is that Injection is like my favorite song when it's like the song that sounds the least like Kerosene 454. Like
that's true. It kind of
it's like
sounds
such a
more.
funny thing for me to like, but to define, not define them because I don't define them by it, but it's like that riff is like pretty much unlike any
Oh,
other Kerosene 454 riff. It's like it's weird because it's like the least noisy song because it's so clean and it's so much about essentially playing a riff like it's a loop
right.
and then messing and then playing with the loop. But again, it completely works because of one, their overall sensibility and crafting stuff, but then two, Darren's drums.
The
Um,
drums and again though the guitar, because on Situation at Hand there's, and again I can't name tracks, but there's another one that we talked about before where the guitar sounds like the pattern it's playing in sounds like a an old like printer printing.
mhm.
And that's what I mean, like I feel like with this genre there was a lot of like really interesting guitar reinvention happening. Like I don't, who the hell thinks, I don't know if they intended it to sound like a printer, but it sounds just like a printer. I definitely recommend listening to Situation at Hand after we get off this for both of us, because I got to remember the names of things. But um, yeah, I don't know. I think that was evident in Fugazi too, because Fugazi would do like really. When you were talking about studio tricks, I was thinking how much Fugazi used studio tricks, and then also Lungfish towards the end, like
Mhm.
Feral Hymns is full of like production type ideas,
Yeah,
sound
yeah.
collage
And
stuff.
Fugazi, what was it? It's funny because I was talking about that the instrumental on this sounded like a Fugazi instrumental. One of them's called Combination Lock because Ian played the guitar with a combination lock as the pick.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Interesting.
It takes there's so much. I think what's interesting about this record is it has like such a sound and they're trying so much stuff, but it doesn't have like a novelty effect. Like, and I remember seeing them. They're not the kind of band, and this isn't like a diss, but like a band from around the same time that I quite like was Franklin,
Oh yeah.
um, who were heavily influenced by dub. But for them to play their songs required a legal pad to adjust all the pedals between each song. Like really what they needed was like seven guitars or something, right?
Oh
And like
yeah.
switch guitars out. But Ralph would be down on his hands and knees with a legal pad, changing the effects signal chain to play a song. And
Oh
Kerosene
really?
454 didn't need to do anything like that. They
Right.
could just like rage through the set with really not needing to do much more than tune.
Right.
Um, and to get that much range out of what they were doing, it's pretty impressive.
Yeah.
Uh,
Definitely.
I will say, I think the thing that about Injection that's so interesting is how by doing something so stripped down, how much it brings to the fore, how good they were at the like art of dynamics and like shifting their dynamics.
Hmm.
Like when it goes into the melodic part of that song, I don't particularly like that part, but it's so unbelievably necessary in order to then bring the main riff back in again.
Yeah.
Like it absolutely has to be there as this palate cleanser that sets up like, all right, we're going right back into this like looping riff. And the way that they ratchet up the tension by when both guitars play the riff and then it falls off again. And it's one of the only times they have something resembling a breakdown on this record.
Okay. Yeah.
Nearly all the time, every instrument is going at once. And it's just the nature of what they're playing makes it softer because it gets melodic, but there's very few instances where anybody stops. And that song
Right.
is one of the few where people just don't do shit and let the other people do things. And I feel like it helps even it helps you see how good they were, because you're like, okay, there's like not a lot that they're working with here, and it's done so well. So then you
Yeah.
kind of see like just how skillful they were when you've got like one of these ragers that just
Right.
was like, or a pretty song that's 5 minutes long that just completely works.
Well, that was the thing about them like live was it was just like unrelenting, like, energy. And I won't tell the story again about seeing them in a blizzard, but I will just say that there was nobody there and they put like 110% into their performance. It was like pretty impressive. But
Imagine
yeah,
seeing them on that tour with Hoover.
they toured with Hoover. What?
Yeah.
Oh wow, that would have been great.
Before Darren joined the band, they moved to DC with that other drummer, to Eric, I think his name was. He was gonna do, and he was like that, and they toured the U.S. for 6 weeks in winter with Hoover.
Holy shit, that's a long tour.
Yeah, I think those are where those videos that Jim Wall put up on YouTube, like that one I put in like the top 5 thing of Hoover, and
Oh,
it's like Hoover at that point, the 7-inch had just come out, and they're playing these sets of like the songs from the second 7-inch plus the long epic songs off the LP. And it's like I just can't even imagine seeing those two bands together at
I
that
know,
time.
right?
How good that must have been.
That's crazy. Yeah, I only got to see Hoover once, but it was good. I'm wondering if that must have not have been that tour, because
Yeah,
I
or
don't think.
maybe Hoover didn't do the whole thing. That's like the
Yeah,
other possibility.
it was a weird show. It was like Hoover, and the only other band I remember on the bill was, you remember Doc Hopper? It was like
Yeah,
yeah, it was
New
Hoover and Doc
Jersey,
Hopper.
like kind of poppy melodic hardcore band.
Yeah, it was at Harvard. It was like in some like cafeteria on the Harvard campus or something. But
Weird places you can see shows.
I know. Did you go to that makeup show at Brown University in like '95? That was like in
Mm-mm.
a hit. It was like in a hidden. It was the hardest location to find where the venue was because you had to like follow signs around campus, and then you would go in, and it was like this back door to like some university building, and there was a show going on inside. It's so funny. It was the makeup, the Hydrogen Terrors, and La Savi Fab. I think was that
Oh, it's a
show.
wild
It's a good
lineup.
bill. Yeah, I
That would be pretty killer.
think that was
Um,
'95.
Anything else to say about Came By to Kill Me? I
Probably,
think we're
but I
going to
can't.
talk about the artwork when I get my copy in.